everybody, and special thanks to Bob and Chris for making this night possible. Also, a very special thanks to Elizabeth and to Melissa for helping to make it happen. This might be, I think it is. Is it the first time where
Definitely the first time we interviewed me.
this one interviews this one? And trust me when I say we've been to Bob's talks, and consummate storyteller. You'll prepare your questions as you hear them being answered. So, but here's to Chris and Bob, and thank you both for being here. I did spend some time last night thinking, what question have I never heard? But I don't know. A lot of them go by me.
That will be yours, Gary, if nobody else asks
okay.
it first. Well, thanks to all of you for being here, because that's really what makes everything that we do matter. That there are people to witness and appreciate it and show up and celebrate. Thanks, Dad, for giving me this opportunity.
Well, thanks for suggesting it.
Yeah, this is the first of many, I hope.
We're going to take this on the road.
Yeah, we're gonna take it on the road. Although we're already in New York, so it's like there's nowhere to end up, you know. So I had an idea, though. I'm gonna reference the paper as little as possible, but I apologize in advance for darting to it every once in a while. But I'd like everybody to consider a superimposition on the setting here tonight. This is a great gallery. I don't want you to leave this space per se, but I want you to imagine the West Village. I want you to come with me to where I've had these conversations with my dad, which is at his place in the West Village. And I'm 48 now, and I've lived in lots of spots. There have been many family homes, but the one that's been consistent from the time I was born that I came home from the hospital to was my dad's place. And it's still his place. So I think it's kind of important that you're all there too. So I want you to come down to the West Village, to Abington Square. Some of you maybe know where that is, others maybe don't. And it's where Hudson rolls up to 8th Avenue.
It's where 9th Avenue meets 8th Avenue and Bleecker Street.
Yeah.
Far
Yeah.
West Village.
Abington Square, there's a little park where lots of kids are playing, nannies and families, and Bleecker Street is running east from there. And then you go around the corner at the bus stop cafe down Bethune Street, further west, down to West Beth, where Bob and Elizabeth live. West Beth, the old Bell Laboratory building, where technologies for communication were advanced, and now a bunch of wild hippie artists have made home in these old rooms for communication advancement. They are now advancing communications in their own way. You go through the myriad, the maze of the building, down to my dad's door. It's been knocked on millions of times by the most incredible folks. Some common people, but a lot of them uncommon.
Who's common?
Yeah. Who's asking?
What's the average?
Yeah, what's the average? I was there for some of those evenings, wild soirees with names that might make everyone's head spin, and then others, and lots of transformative conversations and adventurous, exploratory trips and segues and throughout the years. And then also those nights where I just came home alone from a show or hanging out with my friends all lit up and happy. And my dad's always up waiting for the evening conversation. We sit in the living room, and some of us are looking to talk because we're all excited. Others come to my dad's to let down after a hard time. He's always there, a very personable man, very caring, very interesting, deep thinking. So to have a conversation in his living room is a special thing. So that's where we are today, if you don't mind. All sitting there together.
Welcome to the living room.
Welcome to Bob and Elizabeth's living
I always
room.
have my pictures up on the wall.
That is true. It kind of feels like your house. Well, I thought we'd start. Dare I suggest your career really starts in the mid to late '60s. I mean, I know that you were doing your own early things that led up to your skill set to be able to get started in the mid to late 60s, but you had some important things happen for you around that time, early 70s. You know, young artists like myself, we always are wondering when that moment might come. That is a transformative moment for us where our career actually like takes in and we get to see this thing take shape that looks like, okay, now it's going to be art full time. This will be our life. This is going to be the thing that catapults me in. Would you say you had a moment or an event in your life that actually made you realize, okay, I'm going to be able to do this for a living?
Well, yeah, I mean, because I was very slowly leading up to being able to take pictures of bands. After high school, I tried a couple of colleges because my parents wanted me to go to college, but that didn't really work out. And so I ended up living with friends in Greenwich Village, and they formed a band, and so I was living with a band. And photography was always my hobby, and it was a way I made money. I went to parties and took pictures of people. I made pictures for the local newspaper. I didn't really have a lot of connections, or I didn't know how to become a photographer, even though I was. That's all I did. But basically with my friends, I wasn't really looking to become anything. The idea was to turn on, tune in, and drop out. I didn't want to be in, I wanted to be out, and I only later learned that I was actually falling in because living with the band is what I did for the rest of my life. Different bands. Because the band in the 60s, every time they changed drummers, they changed names and they would need a new picture, like all bands. And I was taking pictures for my friends, so I had a series of pictures of them. And then finally, around 1968, I think, they broke up, but they got one last gig, and they played that gig, and Bob Gruen, one of the most world-famous producers, he invented the Four Seasons, and he made over 80 top 10 singles. And he was at the party, and he liked the band. He used them for the vocals of a project he was working on. You could hear them sing the song Barbarella for the movie. That's my best friend from high school's voice. And he produced an album for them which was very poppy. It wasn't really their sound. The band kind of fizzled out. There was a problem that the lead singer was a black guy and the rest of the band was white. And in 1969, that was a dilemma for the salespeople from the record company. They didn't know what to do about that. So they really didn't go too far, except that I learned how to take pictures of different bands, the same band actually, in different conglomerations. In a very comfortable way, I learned how to take pictures of the band. And then when they got the record company, they sent my pictures to Atlantic Records. Bob Rowlance was the publicist. He liked my pictures. He hired me. The first job in the music business, I was hired to take pictures of Tommy James and the Shondells opening for Hubert Humphrey in a parking lot in the rain in Yonkers. And I guess that was 1968 when he was running for president. Anyway, I remember that night that I talked to the band, became friendly with them, and got a ride home back all the way downtown with them, which was a pattern I would follow for the rest of my life, getting to be friendly with a band and ending up on a bus or in a car or something, you know. The big moment of change for my life, because I was basically starting to get some jobs after that, a few jobs with Atlantic Records. They introduced me to a publicist, the Dick Gersh agency. They hired me for a couple of jobs. I remember taking pictures of the Bee Gees' 10th anniversary. Nobody knew they had been together 10 years. They only were in America about 2 years, so all of a sudden they had a 10th anniversary. But I took a lot of pictures at that party and met a lot of people who liked the pictures that I took at that night, and started to hire me for a couple more. But then the moment was when a friend of ours, Judy, you know Judy Rosen, one of his mom's best friends, our best friend, was a big fan of Tina Turner. She had heard about Ike and Tina Turner. She said, we had to go see Ike and Tina Turner. They were amazing. So we went to see them, and they were opening for Sam and Dave at the Felt Forum under Madison Square Garden. And I remember they came out, and they played a show. I was totally mesmerized and blown away by Tina, by the energy and the excitement. And she danced off stage with a strobe light. You just see all these flashing images of Tina, and it's just super exciting. And I remember sitting there and watching the curtain and just being amazed by what I'd seen. I think Sam and Dave came on over here and did a show, and I was just still thinking about Tina. And it turned out that they played around New York City that whole week. They had a few shows. So a couple nights later, we went to see him at a place called the Honka Monka Room, which was on Queens Boulevard. You can't make a name like that up, you know. And that time I brought my camera. It was the first time I brought my camera to photograph somebody I didn't know, just because I was so excited by Tina. And I took some good pictures that night because I was really into the moment and into it. And at the end of the show, the strobe light started flashing and she's dancing all over. And I looked at my camera, I had about 4 or 5 frames left. And I thought, I wonder what would happen if I took a picture 1 second, because I had no idea when to take a picture with the lights flashing. But if I open it for a second, maybe I get a few flashes in the 1 frame. And I tried that. And then when I developed the film, 4 of the pictures are basically useless. One of them is on the back of my book over there, and it's one of my best pictures ever. It's 5 images of Tina caught in the strobe lights.
I'm just going to also say it's right here.
Oh, yes, there's a silk screen of it right over here. All these silk screens are available. Speak to Melissa. But yeah, it's one of my best pictures. It just captures Tina in 5 images, but this is not Photoshop. This is 1 picture, 1 second, and that's what Tina did. A lot of times, actually, a few times people asked me if I could do a picture like this for them, and I always said, I'll do what I did and you do what Tina did. So obviously it's never happened. But the thing was, the moment was that I developed pictures, I liked the pictures. There was a few others I took that night that were pretty good. And we went to see Ike and Tina again in New Jersey. There was a theater in the Round, and we went to see them there. And I brought the pictures with me to show my friends. It was Judy and a couple other people were coming, so I brought the pictures to show them from the night earlier. And as we were walking out of the theater, it was a theater in the Round, so the dressing rooms were outside in trailers. And Ike Turner was walking from one to another. And Judy saw Ike and literally pushed me in front of Ike. I still remember her voice saying, "Show Ike Turner the pictures." And he stopped and he said, "What pictures?" He's got a very deep voice. And he looks you in the eye and sees from your head to your toe. He's a very intense kind of person. And I just said, I took these pictures the other night. And he looked at the pictures. He said, "Hey, these are pretty good pictures. I got to show these to Tina." And he took me into the dressing room, and I'm having trouble breathing standing next to Tina Turner. I had no idea that I would be in a situation like that. And she was liking the pictures. And I remember Ike saying, I had a feeling someone was taking pictures at the right time the other night. Like he was aware of me doing that. And it really turned out that me and Ike had a very good connection. And he said, meet me in New York, I'll introduce you to the publicist. And he sent me to a guy named Mark Greifenher. I called him and said, I want you to buy these pictures. I'm sending this guy over. And I go over there and I had like 10 pictures. And Marv was like, well, we don't really have a budget. We don't buy pictures. You know, the act sends us a picture and that's all we need. And he said, but I can give you $75 for 10 pictures. And I took it. I was like, wow, I made a sale. So, but he took me to a party downtown. I met a guy named Lenny Barron, who was a designer having a party. And at the party I met, from the gallery, from Howell, Jane Friedman, who actually runs the Howell Gallery now, a really good gallery on the Lower East Side. And she was, very soon after I met her, Patti Smith's manager. And she, at the time, was managing a club called Hurrah, where she would bring a lot of the young English bands over. Like all the Hollies or, the Faces, people like that, when they played their first date in America was with Jane Friedman. I still know her today. And I met her in my first week in the music business, So you never know, you start meeting people and it just snowballs and snowballs. But that was the night when Ike said, I like these pictures.
I thought you might tell that story as the answer to the question. I mean, I've heard
also I met Billy Smith at the party, and Billy took me to the record company. And I hardly knew me, but he convinced MCA Records. They said, you got to hire this guy to take pictures. This new act was a brand new kind of piano player coming from England. And they said, no, he's brand new. We don't have to. He's just opening for Leon Russell. But that's how I got hired to take pictures of Elton John. And he liked my pictures, and I worked for him every show he did for the next few years.
And you're taking some great pictures of Elton John.
That's why he liked me.
Yeah. I love how, I mean, it's a struck, with all the different names in that story, but I love how the family friend, the important role that Judy plays in this story, where by your telling, it's almost like it might not have happened had his friend not pushed him out.
It was just the timing, and she saw Ike, and she pushed me to catch up to him. Or he would have been a step past, and I would have walked behind him.
Judy's still pushing us into
Judy
stuff.
always pushes people. She's that kind of person.
That's her job.
Yeah.
Well, that's great.
It's not easy to be Judy.
No, it's right. It's not. I mean, I have these ordered and all that, but I'm going to move to out of order for a second because what you said in this answer is a great segue into my question about the importance that relationship in general and friendship has played in the success of your career, and if you could
Very
speak to that. I've witnessed it all my life as a very young kid going out with you and just seeing the way that you relate with people and the way that they bring us in as a result, that we're very rarely pushed out.
One night I had to babysit for Chris, and because I was waiting for the babysitter to show up, I had to go to the record plant to see the Clash for a recording. And I had to take care of Chris, and the babysitter was late. And finally, it was like getting too late, and I said, "Okay, we're gonna meet us at the record plant." And Ginny was supposed to come and pick you up at the.
How old are
You were probably 3 or something, right? It was no later than that. You were probably 5. That's pretty young. It was probably '79, I think they were recording in New York. And all the way up there, I'm telling them this is an adult situation. These guys are working in the studio. They're doing serious work. You cannot just kid around. Don't, start laughing. Don't cry. No matter what happens, just be cool and be quiet and, don't interrupt them. And we walk in the studio and they see this little kid and they all made little balls of paper, right? They all start throwing
right in the
paper.
eye. As soon as I walk in,
Balls of
Joe is yelling at Mick's yelling at
Let's throwing
somebody.
things at him.
Don't hurt the kid.
Funny situation. When I took you to see Kiss,
Yeah.
you were even younger. He was about 4, I think.
Yeah.
And I got him I had a vinyl jumpsuit I bought in Japan, and a shirt that lit up with a battery that blinked Kiss.
The best.
And I had to take pictures of Kiss down in front of the stage. And we got there a bit early, so I took Chris to a seat. We had a nice seat and good seats up on the right there, on that, in the closed section. And I took him to the seat, and I said, "I'm going to be down there. I'm going to see you up here." And I left him alone in a Kiss audience. and then the bombs are going off and the fire.
I remember holding onto my seat so that I wouldn't bounce out. And these are fixed to the ground.
Every once in a while I turn around, make sure he was there, wave, "Okay, everything okay." And afterwards we went backstage. I wanted to introduce him to Gene, and Gene is towering up like that. And Chris was hiding behind my leg. He was hugging my leg like it was a tree. He would not come out.
All right, so now...
Gene's a monster.
Yeah, he was terrifying. And the best. When he would stick his tongue in the blood, it was always so fantastic. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Now we have to segue again, because you just brought me into it. We're going to come back to the question of relationships maybe later on. But since you just brought that up, I want you to talk about that piece of incorporating being a father, being a parent into your career, because, I think that you are uniquely successful at not having to stop doing what you were doing and not having to, lose touch with your child at that time. But a little bit more on that. It's important to note that you and I have always had this fantastic relationship. No matter what you were going through, it wouldn't ever last too many weeks before, we would be hanging again and doing stuff. And as a father now, who's balancing a music career and a very much present in my home life, and friends who are also trying to do that, we often talk about the fact that you were able to pull this off. Now, I know there's no recipe for success. It's kind of like you got to be the person. But I wonder if you could speak to what it is to try and have that kind of balance where you can live the wild, rock and roll lifestyle and also keep some, part of yourself, this value alive, where you can also be a very present
I'm going to have to give most of the credit to your mom. Your mom did most of the raising, but she always welcomed me into your life. Whatever house she had 2 beds in your room. I was always welcome. Whatever husband she had, There were 2 others. I took pictures at our weddings. We always stayed very close. His mom and I broke up because we liked each other and we knew we were doing different things. And we broke up before we got angry about that. His mom, actually, this is my wife now, Elizabeth. We've been married, I think in a month it's going to be 30 years that we're together.
Wow.
Chris's mom, Nadia, was the officiator who married me and Elizabeth. She announced us man and wife. So that's a pretty close relationship. But she always, she raised you very well, provided you with a really good upbringing, but always welcomed me into the house. I will say that my mom encouraged me from early on, saying never lose touch with you. And when you were born, I made a rule in my head to never ever lie to you. That one person, it was just, the one person in my life I was going to have an honest relationship with. And I never wanted to be caught in a lie, or, I might have left out some truths.
For all of
I didn't
us.
take up, well, yes, ease the blow. But, there are some things I did I don't like to talk about. But I never wanted to lie to you. I always wanted to have an open relationship. And in that sense, I had a very good friend that I could always rely on, because we had a mutual, honest relationship. And I could talk. I remember our conversation really started shortly after you actually learned language and had a grasp of words. You were probably 2.5, 3 years old. And we went to Bimini. And we ended up sitting in the back of a shack called the End of the World. It's a bar that's about half the size of the front of this gallery. So about a quarter the size of the gallery. It's called the End of the World Bar. We sat in the back, surrounded by conch shells, and we had a 3-hour intelligent conversation. And I was amazed, wow, this kid knows a lot. But a lot of it was just the honesty of being straight about everything.
Yeah, and
I was very glad that I could have that relationship, because I was absent a lot.
Yeah.
I traveled a lot. But yes, whenever I came home, I made a point of going up to your mom's and staying over.
Additionally, you would bring me out into what you were doing, and
I came to Max's to see the New York Dolls.
This is the piece that a lot of people don't realize as parents, that they think that
when he was a baby, when he was born, we had me and Nadia, me and his mom shared his upbringing. We broke up about a year later, and at that point shared custody, in the sense that he would spend the weekend with her maybe, and Monday morning she'd bring him to school, and then I'd pick him up Monday afternoon and bring him back to school.
Which is a common thing nowadays.
And then Thursday I'd bring him to school and she would pick him up, or vice versa, whatever it was. Like, we would alternate. So she would have a weekend, I would have a weekend. And I remember you have those, kind of
baby Bjorn things. It's like a backpack.
You wear a baby on your chest and ride your bike around town, dropping off pictures. And I do remember visiting John Lennon in the fall of '74, shortly after you were born, with a little baby on my chest. I remember going up to his apartment. He's like, "What's that?" But I was so proud. I'm like, "This is my baby. This is my son."
Yeah, those amazing pictures that you took of John and Yoko and Sean when Sean was just born. What astonishes me when I look at those pictures is it looks like my life to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the family the family presence, cohesiveness, awareness that was in that room in that photo session. You could see the values, the family values that were alive with John and Yoko and Sean. And I know that even though you and my mom had split, that there was this same kind of consciousness, this kind of connection and value and relationship.
We lived apart. We never mentally really split.
Yep.
In that sense.
Yep, very cool. It's very cool, and it's resulted now. My daughter has just made her first record, and I raised my kids without question in the clubs that I was playing in. That's just what you do if you're a good dad. It's the spinning it on its head, this idea that the kids are supposed to be kept out of those spaces. Kids are not supposed to be part of a harmful practice of any kind. But rock and roll is not that. People need to do what they need to do. But playing music loud and bringing it to life is essential for young people. And I had that because you brought me out with you into what you loved, and then I was able to pass that on. So I just wonder if you had any thoughts about that, like that you actually had a very successful parenting model in doing that, in my opinion.
I just shared my life.
Yeah.
And there were times when I couldn't. I mean, he had a series of interesting babysitters. Serena Fox, a girl who ended up marrying the guy from Squeeze. Cindy used to babysit for you. Johnny Thunders used to drop his son off, Johnny Jr., and because I could afford a babysitter, so they would, he would leave his kid. We'd go out to the Lower East Side together and leave the kids with somebody.
I think the person I remember most was David Johansen. He was always dragging me around with him. It was great.
But I remember bringing you to Max's to a Dolls show, and it was funny because there was 2 shows a night, so it was a 9 o'clock and a midnight show, and it was like after the early show, it was like 11:30 or something, and I'm holding Chris, I'm getting ready to leave, and Tony, the drummer, came by. He said, okay, so long, I'll see you later. And Tony said, oh, you're not staying for the second show? I said, no, I gotta bring the kid home. And Chris heard what was going on. He's about 3 or something, but he heard second show. And I say, okay, we gotta go. He goes, Dad, didn't you, second show, Dad, second show. No, it's the lady. He said, oh, second show. And we stayed for the second show, and at 3 in the morning, as the roadies were packing up, Chris walked over and climbed on the drum stool and started playing on the drums. And all the roadies stopped and kind of started staring because he had rhythm and he sounded like he knew what he was doing. And they're all going like, hey, check the kid. And that was the first time I saw you actually had rhythm and had a feel for music.
I love it.
I have a picture of him playing the New York Dolls drums.
Yeah. I just wanted to stop for a second and check with the audience. Does anybody have any questions or comments or anything to say about all this parenting malarkey at this point?
This is great.
Yeah. All right. Great. All right. Well, yeah. I wanted to see if you had anything to say about the importance of relationship and friendships made as like an element for what
It's
has
a big
given,
element in what I do.
given
Yeah,
your
it's very
career
much in what I do.
sustainability.
Another photographer, a friend of mine down the block, has a studio and assistants, and people come and they get makeup and they get background, and it's all very professional. I can do work like that, but even that, I don't use a lot of assistants. I work very personally with people. But right from the beginning, in my life, I've just made relationships with people. With Icantina, it started so accidentally with, meeting him and him liking my pictures. But then what happened was that night he said, call me on Monday in New York. Now that was like a Wednesday or Thursday, and they were playing Saturday in the Newport Jazz Festival. So we decided to go and see him. And I had no connection with him. We had not even a thought. I didn't know where a backstage door was to go and ask, but I didn't know the guy. He just said, meet him on Monday. So we saw the show. It was amazing. Roland Kirk, Kenny Burrell, Roland Kirk, and Icantina Turner. One of the best shows I've ever seen in life, outdoors, summer night. It was nice. And then we're driving back. Now, when you're a kid, you can drive 4 hours, 5 hours to Rhode Island, have a beautiful afternoon, a couple of beers, and then drive home. Although, like most people, you do need to stop for a cup of coffee. So I pulled into the first truck stop, on the highway, and I get out of the car, and as I stepped out of the car and the door closed, 2 limousines pulled in next to me. I kind of had to step back. And Icantina Turner's band stepped out of the limousines. And Ike saw me standing. He goes, didn't I see you last night? I said, yeah, I came to see the show up here. He goes, oh, come in and have breakfast with us. And that's how I started to meet the band. And I ended up, talking to them and getting to know them. When I got back to the car, I said, you won't believe what happened. And they will go, what? You didn't wake us up? I said, well, they invited me. They didn't invite the car for me. But from then on, I just got to know people and I get along with people.
Yeah.
And a lot of my relationships are like that.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the story about the old woman in Arles?
Oh, okay. Joe Franklin had a TV show here in New York. A lot of you remember him. He was on late at night. And one of his mottos was, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. And I relate that moral to a story I heard about the oldest woman in the world a number of years ago. She was 124 years old. She lived in Arles, France. And they would interview her every year or so, like, what's your secret? And she was like smoking till she was 105. She rode her bike till she was 110. Don't try that at home, kids. But, and so they'd always come and interview her. What's your view on the world? You're the oldest person. And one year they asked her, you're so old. You were in Arles when Van Gogh was walking around here. And she goes, yeah, I knew Van Gogh. He was a friend of my boyfriend. We used to see him in the town square. And he was a real curmudgeon. He was always very rude to everybody. He used to try to sell pencils, but he was always very rude. And the moral is that, you see, it's nice to be, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice, because you don't know if 100 years from now, some guy's 19-year-old girlfriend is going to be talking dirt about you. So I try to be nice to me.
Yeah, it works. I mean, that's the thing people say to me when I meet somebody who's met you. They're like, oh, your daddy's great. Like, we always want him around. And I think that people wanting you around has given you the opportunity to capture these moments. Like, without that, you wouldn't have been in those rooms. You wouldn't have had those moments.
It's funny, because I never really know what I add to a situation, but people tell me I do add something, and I remember something. I found out, what is this, like 1980 to now is like more than 40 years later. I always wondered what happened, and who was it who told me? Somebody in England. Who was there? Anyway, I was with The Clash, and we had traveled to Boston. They were opening for The Who. It was a giant stadium. There was a lot of tension going on. And in those days, everybody had a big beatbox. And on the beatbox, they had that song with a chorus, "It's a jungle sometimes that makes me wonder how I keep from going under. Don't push me, because I'm close to the edge." And that was on a beatbox next to me, and I just found a spot where, in those days, you hit the rewind a little bit, and it was zipped back. And it was kind of like scratching, where you just go back, and I just found the moment, like to hit it for just a second or whatever it was. I had the feeling, and I could just zip it back to the beginning, and don't push me, because I'm close to the edge. And I did it about 25 times. And this room was full of tension, and nobody said anything to me. And I kept playing this "Don't Push Me" over and over and over. And I forget who it was, somebody that we saw in England this last trip, and they said to me that they remembered me doing that, and that was a cool thing. And I was like, really? I thought I was bugging everybody. I thought, who's going to be finally pissed off and tell me? But they said they liked me doing that.
Yeah,
and I thought it was so intrusive. But it captured the mood, because everybody was like, don't touch me,
Having a sense of what's going on, being really sensitive and aware of how people are feeling, where they're at, making room for it. I think that's what gets you into these places.
When I see somebody with a problem, I like to fix it, because I don't like problems.
Yeah, well, nobody misses a mess. Everybody likes good things, and no one misses a mess. All right.
I mean, when we were at Damien Hirst's house, and somebody passes out in the billiard room, and who did they call? They go, "Oh, Bob, somebody's passed out. Can you come and help?"
Yeah, the Boy Scout. Somehow you've maintained that Boy Scout
I was a Boy Scout,
sensibility,
and
man.
I learned to be trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent.
I don't know how you can remember that.
Oh,
You remember a lot of things.
you gotta repeat something every week when you're 8 years old.
Yeah,
You remember,
you do.
especially something like that. It became
The good old
true.
days.
It's like the Ten Commandments. It's things you should.
Yeah.
It's the right way to live. It's a moral code.
So you're starting mid-60s, late 60s, early 70s. The political environment is very active. We're moving out of the beats, moving into the hippies are taking over. And I have a sense of where you're going to go with your answer on this, but I'm curious. So I wonder if any of your thinking, your attraction to being an artist, your attraction to the medium, any of it was ever driven by an interest in the power of change that photography has, the power of change that rock and roll has. Do you see a message in your pictures, in your style of your work?
You set me up perfectly. I believe in music with a message. I believe in using the media for a message. The very first concert that I remember going to a theater and seeing a performer other than Temple was Pete Seeger played a concert in the evening at my high school. And it was the most moving concert I've ever seen. It was all about being good, being people being equal, being justice. He had everybody singing along in 3-part harmony. This section, where this section sings this part and that section sings that part, like a choral thing, and everybody was singing along, and we had so much fun. And it was a great message of equality and workers' rights and freedom. And then within a week, he was attacked in the local newspaper for being a communist, and how dare the school allow a communist to spread his message. But I heard the message, and it was the best message I heard since the rabbi was talking about being good. And I was really shocked that, you know, they would attack him like that. And you see a lot of people who are, you know, for peace and for goodness attacked like that. But I always believed that music carried a message and that people hear the message that way. And after Pete Seeger, I followed, well, first Miles Davis actually, but then Bob Dylan and people like the Buffalo Springfield. And if you actually listen to the words of the New York Dolls, they were a very political group. Their big hit song was called Trash. It's one of the first ecology songs. They talk about trash, pick it up, don't take my life
That's
away.
what they were talking about?
People thought they were talking about their girlfriends.
Yeah.
They're talking about pick that trash up. Don't throw my life away. And yeah, people don't hear the lyrics because they're so funny and they're so loud, you know. But and in the Clash too, especially, you know, starting a song with "What are you going to do now?" I just did a question yesterday. Somebody talked about the anger and the, you know, fury of the punk rock, and I said, well, there was a day, a slow news day, when an unknown band cursed on TV, and it became the filth and the fury. And it wasn't filth or fury; it was one common curse word that everybody who heard the TV show knows the word and probably uses it. And they were egged on by a drunken commentator who said, go ahead, say something, say something. So they said it, and all of a sudden, punk rock is the filth and the fury. But if you listen to the music, yes, the Sex Pistols look back with anger, but the Clash look to the future with hope. And a lot of bands look to the future with hope. And there's even a lot of humor in punk rock, like Germ-Free Adolescent, or you know, songs like that. My Baby Makes Good Sculpture, yeah, that's a punk song, you know. Debbie Harry's songs are not angry, they're quirky, but they're not angry, or certainly not evil, you know, or filthy, you know. So, you know, the punk gets a really bad name in that sense, but my focus with it was always looking for a better world, looking for a more positive world. That's why I like the Clash. That's why I like Green Day.
What do you say?
You know, Green Day has a lot of political message.
Oh my God, American Idiot.
They put out a record, and a lot of people put out records that have explicit lyrics. But most bands will put out a G-rated album that doesn't have explicit lyrics because Walmart will not carry a record that has so-called curse words or vulgar language. And they define 7 curse words. Who is it? George Carlin has a whole routine about the 7 words you're not allowed to say. But Walmart sells more than 60% of the records. I mean, nobody sells records anymore except your daughter. But she works in a record store. My granddaughter works in a record store. So, but when people did buy records, Walmart sold 60% of the records in the United States. So most bands would make a G-rated record and leave out the curse words so that they could sell 60% more records. Green Day did not compromise. What they did in an interview when they said, why won't you compromise? Billy said, if you think that our records are dangerous, why don't you just move them to the other side of the store and sell them at the Guns and Knives? So that's why I like Green Day. Oh, another part is that they made a album which they turned into a Broadway show about 3 guys who come out of school and they're all going to go off to New York and have a great life and a beautiful future. But before they get to leave, one of them's girlfriend is pregnant and he has to stay home. And they go to New York, and one of them, the musician, ends up being a junkie. The other one, who can't get a job, goes in the army, goes off to a war, and comes back in peace, like missing apart. And at the end of the play, they're back in their hometown. One guy's broken, the other guy's recovering. The third guy's broken up with his wife, but he has this kid. And I told Bill, and they were actually running, it was a great musical, and they were up for Best Musical of the Broadway of the year against the play Memphis, which is about the discovery of rock and roll and radio DJs. It has a very happy ending. And I was telling Billy, you know, your play is so real and so deep, and it has such a message, and it ends on, you know, a very sad note, but that's like a lot of people, it's very real. And he said, yeah, well, if we had a happy ending, we might have won the Best Musical.
Does anybody have any questions at this point about any of that? Yeah.
Was it always rock and roll? Like, did you have
For me?
other? Yeah.
Well, I would do
rock
just
and roll?
about anything I could. I have done a little bit of fashion. I ended up knowing Stephen Sprouse and Marc Jacobs, and I did some things for them. And a couple other things that would come once in a while. But being in music and rock and roll, I would always be going to a dressing room or a bar, and that's where I would meet people, and that's where I got my jobs. I did not get jobs in office buildings going around with a portfolio. I met people in bars and theaters, and right? Yvette's laughing, right? You don't get hired in an office. You know?
Yes.
Yvette's one of my colleagues, by the way, great photographer right here.
Yeah.
First of all, I love what you said about being a dad. I'm a dad of 2 children, and you know the most important thing for me is the integrity of my relationship with my kids. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. Question: when you prepare for a shoot, like one of my favorite things, I mean, pretty much everything you've done is my favorite, but the most favorite, to be clear, is like Dress to Kill by Kiss. Like, how do you prepare for that? Do you like sketch it out?
Oh no,
Like,
no, we don't make
map the whole
sketches.
thing out?
It's much more, much
question.
looser than that. That was the idea came up from the art director of Cream magazine, Charlie Oranger. Cream magazine was a very funny magazine that was just a step above Mad magazine. We actually had real pictures and stories about real people, but they took the piss out of it. We had fun with it. It wasn't about factual, here's what this guy has for breakfast. Like, nobody really cared. It was much more about being a fan of rock and roll. And we had like a centerfold of Cream Dream, and you know, with Joe Perry standing next to his wrecked Ferrari. You know, was my favorite one. But Stars in Their Cars, that's what it was. But Cream magazine decided to do a photo novella, which is a story, a comic book story told in photos. And the theme was that Kiss would be on their way to work in their secret identity. That's why they're wearing suits, because even in spite of the faces, because they don't have their uniforms. Like when, you know, Clark Kent, when he puts on a suit, he's not Superman. And so we thought, well, with Kiss, if they put on a suit, they're not Kiss. You know? So they discovered in the newspaper that there's a person, we cleverly disguised John Denver, we called him John Cleveland. And they thought that this was the most boring thing, and that boring music was going to ruin the world, and that they had to save the world somehow with rock and roll. So they put up a whole bunch of posters for John Cleveland, but when everybody shows up, Kiss comes out, and they save the world with rock and roll. And they end up having an orgy backstage, which was like one of the weirder things I had to stage on the spur of the moment without a model. We had no money to hire anybody for that. I took fans out of the audience. It was really weird. And that's how I met Cindy, who married the squeeze guy. And to get medals pinned on their chest and stuff. But so one of the pictures, we started out with them going to work in the subway, and then they come up out of the subway, and then we just had a picture of them on the street discussing their plan to have a secret concert. And that was the moment I said, hey, just stand by that light over there. Okay, look at me. And we took a couple of pictures, you know. We actually then went back to my studio, and they changed into their Kiss costume. And the first picture was on 23rd Street and 8th Avenue. I had to scope out a few subway stations, because the way I saw it is that they get the idea, and then they run into a phone booth pulling off their clothes like Superman, and they run out as Kiss. But I needed a phone booth that went this way and another one that went that way, because I didn't want them to run in, you know, I didn't want them to run into each other in the magazine, you know. So we took the first pictures on 23rd Street, and then we went to 14th Street, where there was a phone booth going the other way. And it turns out that that's one of the most favorite pictures of a lot of people around the world. We were in Argentina, driving a 6-hour drive from Buenos Aires to the coast, where I had an exhibit in a town on the shore of Argentina, and in the middle, in the desert, we stopped at a gas station, and there's some hairy kids who have Kiss t-shirts on and stuff, and they were looking at me, and I was like checking them out. And as we started to leave, I could see them pointing at me and talking. I told the guy to stop, and I got out, and they're like, "Oh my God, you're Bob Gruen!" And we were in the middle of nowhere. We were far from nowhere. But Kiss is huge around the world, and that is a favorite picture of a lot of people. And it wasn't planned at all. It just was like, "Hey, stand over there. Let's get a sidewalk picture," you know. But for some reason, by the way, Kiss Orgy, which is the title of the backstage picture, somehow gets more hits on my website.
Than anything else. Any other questions?
There's a photo.
There it is.
Oh, yeah, that's running into the
The timing. So, I actually asked the girls if they had any questions for
Oh,
you.
what is that? Yeah, I love to.
So I have two from one. The first one's going to be from the younger one, who's 12. This is his granddaughters. And the next one will be from Jasmine, who's 17. Zinnia asks, what spoke to you about New York? Why New York? Why New York City, not a different city?
Oh, that's easy,
Yeah,
because
that's
everybody
easy.
comes here.
Yeah.
New York's the center of the world for a lot of people, especially in the 70s. And John Lennon himself said that if he were in Rome, in Roman times, he'd want to be, if he was alive in Roman times, he'd want to be in Rome. If he was alive when all the people were in, the 20s in Paris, that's where he'd want to be. But in the 70s, he felt that New York was the center of the art scene in the world. And this was the place to be. And I found that every band that toured ended their tour after they had practiced in 40 or 50 or 80 cities, they finally do a good show in New York and have a big party. So it was always, I didn't have to go anywhere, they would come here. And every night there was a huge band, Madison Square Garden, 6 nights a week, there was everybody.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I hope that New York is that.
And all the
still for
record
people.
companies were here before they moved to LA for the good weather.
Right.
You know.
Right. We saw Sean open up for Lenny Kravitz at the Rosen Ballroom a few years ago, and he said when he got on stage, "Oh, it's so good to be back in New York. Feels like the only place on earth, not the most important
something
place on
about New
earth,
York,
the only."
Well, it's the only common sense place that I've found. A lot of other places just don't have common sense. They take a long time to figure something out, and once you get a rhythm of New York, it's very hard to go anywhere else. But when you're in the rhythm of New York, it's stressful, it's tiring. And I used to always say, in the 70s, my two favorite things was getting on a plane and seeing the Empire State Building fade into the distance and go, and I'm going somewhere, it's gonna be exciting, let's see what's up, And my next favorite thing was seeing the Empire State Building appear on the horizon, and oh, thank God, I'm back home. And that could be 2 days later, or actually the next morning. In the old days, they used to have planes that would run at night, like after midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, because the government would fly the mail around. They used to actually deliver mail fast back then. And so the airlines could fly an empty plane because it was full of all the mail. And so I could get a 1:30 plane. I remember seeing Bob Dylan in Atlanta and talking about it at the bar at Max's before it closed at 4 in the morning.
Wow, that's so
You know, coming back from Memphis one time like that.
Jasmine asks, how did the scenes you helped to create and define affect you personally, both good and bad? Do you have any regrets?
Regrets, I have a few, but not too many. How did it affect me? Yes, I got involved with drugs because so many of my friends were. It just seemed to be a lifestyle.
Yeah.
That was very much an effect of the company I kept.
Yeah.
The first people who showed me drugs, heavy drugs, were very respected people. World class respected people. So one of them was saying, "Oh, you can do this. You're cool." And I thought, "Wow, I'm cool." And 5 years later, I somehow crawled out of a horrible medical situation.
Yeah.
So that affected me.
I think she was.
But also, I got to travel around the world and without paying for it, getting paid for it. I've been to Japan 17 times. We just got a okay that we're going back to Sao Paulo. It'll be my 7th trip to Sao Paulo, about my 10th trip to South America, unless you count Mexico too. That was great. I got all over the world. I have friends from Tokyo to Germany to Paris, in England. Of course, now I'm old and a lot of them have passed away, but I had a lot of friends around the world. And I still have some younger ones,
Yeah.
I know they're kids.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, walking through the village with you and Elizabeth now, I often feel like the two of you are this important element that makes the village still the village for me. Just watching the two of you walk the streets always really affects
to
me.
become an old timer,
Yeah.
because I was a young timer. I moved into the village, I was 19 years old when I got my first apartment on Sullivan Street. I moved in on the first night of the St. Anthony Festival. And I thought, wow, what a welcome party. In those days, you could get beer and sausages and walk down the street with it. It was
It
great.
was just for you, Bob.
It was just me. Well, the timing was. I've always had good timing. That's why I call my book Right Time, Right Place.
Yeah.
Oh no, right place, right time. That's right.
Yeah, it's there's a serendipity.
And then you have to do the right thing. That's the part I left out.
It's in the book, though.
Yeah, it's in the book, very much so.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this spirituality to your rock and roll story that I always find incredibly valuable. And I think that's why a lot of the folks on the wall here ended up in your living room late at night, because they wanted some of that, that veracity.
I've had a strong moral basis, and like I said, starting with Pete Seeger and music with a message. When the country was trying to throw John Lennon out of the country, President Nixon was afraid that John Lennon was going to appear at a political rally, and all he was doing was asking for peace in a time of war, but they thought that was criminal, and they wanted him thrown out of the country. And I had suggested to him that we take a picture at the Statue of Liberty. Because my mom came from Hungary, and she always remembered floating past the Statue of Liberty and what the statue meant. And as a child, when I was early teens, my mom said, people from around the world come to New York for a vacation. We lived on Long Island at the time. She said, we're going to New York for a vacation. We just didn't stay in a hotel. Yeah. But we went to the Empire State Building, the Statue of Liberty, the cloisters, and we got around, museums. But I remember going to the Statue of Liberty, and it was always a very important symbol to me of personal freedom. And I should mention that freedom has always been a big thing to me. I was born right after the war, and every day somebody would say, we fought for freedom, and we fought so you could be free, and it's a free country. And I was in summer camp, I was 5 years old, and they wanted me to go to the flag raising at 7 in the morning, and I am not a morning person, and even then, it's the first time I announced that I'm not a morning person. I'm not getting out of bed and going to your flag raising. It's too early. And they said, you gotta come. And I said, no, I'm not. It's a free country. I can do what I want. They carried my bed to the ceremony. I wouldn't get out of bed, but they carried the bed.
They brought the bed.
You gotta compromise.
Your granddaughters
But anyway,
take after
so when I suggested to John Lennon that the statue was a symbol of welcome to the country and we should be welcoming people like him, he agreed right away, yes, let's take the picture. And it's one of my favorite pictures because it was one of the few pictures I did on purpose with a message that I thought of, that one of the masters of media in the world, agreed to do. And actually doing it was relatively simple. We just took a ferry out there, like 2 people. I thought, I don't need a permission. He's a tourist from England. Lots of tourists go to the Statue of Liberty and have a picture. The hardest part was getting the camera angle right, get a person who was just under 6 feet in the right proportion with a statue that's 305 feet, and you're on an island, so you can only back up so far.
But what about the fact that...
Something to comment on that.
Yes, are you going to mention the stay off the grass picture? I mean, that's going to be
okay.
right.
All right, well,
Come
that's a big part of
on.
it. That's a big part of it.
Wait. So if someone comes in, they see this, and they say, is that Photoshop?
No,
And I said-
no. Well, we did a little bit here and there to change the,
Right, but I said, well,
to clean it up a
I
little.
wonder if there were computers in those days.
Right.
But
Yeah,
the
no, we
thing
didn't do
is-
Photoshop, no.
But the
They think that
question-
Tina Turner's
The
Photoshop.
question of all questions is, did the sign really say keep off grass?
Oh,
Or
yes,
did
oh,
it
absolutely,
say
no, we didn't
keep
do that.
off the grass?
Yes, absolutely, and it's a big point, because normally I hate having extraneous words in a photo.
Does everyone know what we're talking about?
We're talking about the John Lennon picture
Oh,
of
is
the
it?
Statue of
Okay,
Liberty.
good.
Behind
So you
John
can see
Lennon,
it.
there's a little sign, and the sign says keep off grass. And
And the
a lot
picture
of
was
people have
there.
noticed that it doesn't say keep off the grass. And the reason that they tried to throw John Lennon out of the country was because he was caught in England with some grass, some marijuana. And it turned out later that it was actually planted. He wasn't really caught. The funny thing was when they found that, he said, oh my God, I didn't know that was here. But they didn't find his grass, which was in a different place. But yes, I usually hate to have extraneous words. I learned early on that when you look at a picture, you have to be aware of how your eyes move. And you want the eyes to move to the subject and tell the story you're trying to tell. This is one of the little technical things I know about photography. I don't know a lot, but I learned that, and it's a big difference to how to crop a picture is how your eyes move when you see a picture. And I hate having words that don't matter, that distract your eyes when you're supposed to look here and there's a word there that doesn't relate to the picture. In this sense, the words absolutely relate because it doesn't say the, it says keep off grass,
But
and he's promising to be good.
Was that there that way, or did you take the out?
No, you don't do that. You can't take the We
Amazing.
didn't have an eraser.
It was
back
perfect
then.
the way it was.
You
It
had
was
to pay
meant to
a-
be
You had to pay an
ordained.
airbrush artist to come in and do something delicate like that. We didn't have money like that. You know? No, that's the way it came out. And because it said keep off grass, it made sense for the picture, so I never objected to it being there. Or I would have made him move a little bit and cover up the sign.
Cover up the.
And usually I get people to move and cover it up. One time when I was taking pictures of David Bowie, he had a band called Tin Machine, and it was kind of a new band, and he wanted a New York-looking picture. And we had him out on the sidewalk, and there was a bodega in the back, and I noticed it said New York Bodega. And so I just kind of moved slightly so that New York was right between somebody's heads, you know? He wanted a New York picture.
Any other questions?
What's
Yes.
the second? Right.
I was just wondering, like, you mentioned Photoshop, and I'm wondering why you think about the state of photography and concerts now, and like everybody has their phone out at a concert. So.
I'm not a critic, so I don't really think about it in that sense. I see it as progress. I find it, kind of amusing in my life that photography has gone from developing pictures in the dark before they even had a safe light. We were developing pictures, before they had a tank, the daylight developing tank, that was invented when I was about 10. Before that, my mom and I used to develop film in a tank, in a tray. You had to hold the film up and down, you had the tray, develop it, and you'd go like that to keep it even, in the dark, counting seconds. It's much easier now. You just take they still call it a phone, but they sell it on the quality of the pictures. And it's so easy to just touch the camera, touch it once more or twice, and that picture's around the world. And I was able to make a living because if somebody wanted a picture, they had to actually hire somebody who A, had a camera, knew how to operate it, knew how to get a good picture out of it, knew how to develop that picture and produce a print and come back with it in a day or two. None of that exists. There's a friend of mine who's a country singer, and we went to visit him in the dressing room. I used to make a lot of money. Whenever an act was with the president of the record company and his manager, they would take a picture and put it in the trade magazine. I used to get $75 once or twice a week, would pay my phone bill and things like that. So I'm in the dressing room, and the guy's really happy to see me. He introduces me around as a famous photographer. His manager's there, the record company president walks in. Instead of turning to me, the publicist says, "Oh, let me get a picture." Takes out her phone, boom, I'm standing there watching her do my job. And she didn't have to go back to the office because bing, bing, that was out on internet and done.
You always talked about how important it was that you would go right home and develop the pictures and get
Every
them
night
out
when I came home
right
at 4 in the
away.
morning, drunk or not, I would develop my film.
I
hang
remember
it
this
up.
when I was really little, watching him go to work when I was going
We
to
had
sleep.
deadlines, and it took time to develop it, and I couldn't wait and do it a day or two later. A day or two later, there'd be 2 more jobs, hopefully.
Yeah. So,
So
is
I
that-
worked
did we
over
stay
there.
on point enough? In the back there?
Hi, Chris. Hi, Bob.
All right.
Hey, Michael. Hey.
What was Virginia Low like?
Who?
Virginia Low.
Oh, Ginny.
Oh, Ginny.
I rode in the car with her. That's about an hour. So that's all I know.
Oh, yeah. Ginny was a big love of my life and a big support.
Will you just tell
She
everybody
was
who
my
she
patient.
was for you really quick?
Virginia was someone I met. She was very interested in photography as a college girl, also interested in music, and she met promoters of the concerts, and I met her at I don't remember the band, but I remember we were in some after party high over Central Park. And first thing, she helped me out. She used to babysit for Chris. She used to just help me do different things, and through the 70s. And then it was later in the 70s, when I first met her, she was the elevator starter at the World's Fair. And that was Fair, World Trade Center. Her dad was a bartender at the World Trade Center, got her a job as an elevator starter. She used to have this little brown uniform, and she would come to my house at lunchtime. I'm up the West Street. She would come up for her lunch hour, and we'd have lunch together. And she's a huge Beatle fan. She used to play Beatle records. Whenever she would, and Eric Clapton, whenever, I mean, I had Beatle records, but I was, by that time, in the mid-70s, playing a lot of punk records, and I would come home and 8 Beatle records were out when she would babysit for Chris. You know? After Eric, she was one of the biggest Eric Clapton fans in the world. She would buy, if he played 5 nights in Moscow, she would buy 5 new dresses and sit in the front row in Moscow. She went to St. Petersburg, she went to Athens. He played an annual concert at Royal Albert Hall every year. She was in the front row for every show. She had there's a bunch of Where's Eric people. They had a little fanzine called Where's Eric. And they would meet and have cocktails before they came from Japan and Australia, and they would meet in the hotels. Ginny was a huge Eric Clapton fan. I tried to tell her that something happened after 1972, but she didn't want to know about it.
Come on, so she was your agent. She started
Okay, so then
certifying.
in 1980, after John died, and I started getting a lot more demand for my photos. She was working for Globe Photo Agency for about 2 years, and her boss was actually getting sick. He had some nervous disease that was really bringing him down. And I convinced her to start her own agency, the Starfile Agency. In the beginning, it was just 3 photographers that gave her just enough business that she could license to different magazines and pay the rent. And she built it up into the premier agency dealing primarily in music and rock and roll and entertainment. She did a lot of celebrity, she had a couple of paparazzi guys working for her who would take a picture of anything, I mean anybody. I'm talking about Vinny and Chuck and stuff. And so she did very well, and she became very respected and known around the world as Ginny from Starfile. And then she got sick. She got breast cancer. Successfully fought it. After 5 years, we had a big celebration of her success. And then, of course, it came back, and about 5 years later, she passed away. But she fought that. She had leukemia, and she got better.
Yeah, she was an important player.
But she was an important person. We had huge fights. About technical differences, or why did you send this picture to that person, or why didn't you send this picture to somebody? I remember I was in Arles, France, under a full moon with the Roman ruins, and I was in a red phone booth screaming. But I always called Ginny. If I was on a plane that you could make a phone call, Ginny was the one we called. When I was in Africa with you in Nairobi, at the train station, I went across the street to the bank, and on the wall, when you're traveling in those days, it was hard, all different ways to make long distance phone calls. Little by little, it got better. And when was that we went? 1990. We went to Africa. I went out with a flight attendant for a year or so. And one of the first things we did, a couple months after I went with her, she worked for Pan Am, and she knew it was going to go out of business. And she wanted to go to Africa, and so she got discount tickets for us, and I took Chris and his girlfriend and me, and we all went on a safari for 2 weeks to Africa. One of the best trips ever. But when we were getting the tickets to Mombasa, I went into the bank, and there was a wire coming down the wall, and a wall phone just screwed onto this wall. Nothing else on the wall, just a phone.
Calling Ginny.
And it said AT&T Direct. Because by that time they had invented a number where whatever country you went, you could call a certain number, and you get an operator in Atlanta, not some French person or Japanese who didn't speak English. But there was that phone that said AT&T Direct. I picked it up and called Ginny. Guess where I am?
It seems like those are to have a really important, successful relationship, you need to be able to fight well and end well. It needs to be something that advances the connection rather than...
to be intense about your disagreements and get over it,
Yeah.
and not have that break up the relationship.
Exactly.
Because we only knew that we were disagreeing, not liking each other.
Yeah, you're doing it. You're working. We've gone on so long. I just wanted to check with the rest of the room. Anybody?
What was Jasmine's other question?
There isn't a second. There's one from Nadia. That's all that's left.
Oh,
Two here. Yes.
What was hers?
I just want to ask you what your relationship was like with John Lennon.
Oh, the relationship with John Lennon?
Yeah.
He was a good friend. He was very funny.
Really?
He was very charismatic. You always knew that he was John Lennon and you weren't. Not so much, I mean, in a sense, when we met, he was very friendly, very open. And after we got to know each other in the first couple of months, we were just hanging out. We were drinking a lot. laughing a lot. He could keep people laughing. He liked the whole room to be laughing. He liked the whole room to be laughing with him. He would make fun of everybody in a good way. And but I remember after a few months, when I first met him, they were recording the Sometime in New York City album. They were just finishing it. And then they started to make an album for the Elephant's Memory. And that went on all summer, lots of different songs, a double album it ended up. And after the first couple of months, I was taking a lot of pictures. I did all the pictures inside out, a double album, lots of pictures of the Elephant's Memory. And then they started rehearsing to play a concert at Madison Square Garden, a benefit concert for the one-to-one school in Willowbrook in Staten Island. And so they had some rehearsals at a place called Butterfly on 10th Street, the first places were a place, actually, the room was about as big as this. It was a garage that John was hoping to turn into a studio. And he actually had his soundboard, his engineering board flown over from England because it was so special, without realizing that England is 220 voltage and America is 110, and they could not plug the thing in. So they had a soundproof room with no electronics, and they used it to rehearse. And they started singing some of the songs from the Sometime in New York City album. And then he sang Imagine and Cold Turkey. And it was that voice that I heard on a Beatle record. And I remember the shock, like, oh my God, he really is that Beatle. He sounds just like John Lennon. And, but after that, other than that, I always knew, like when I left, I was like, holy shit, I just spent some time with John Lennon. It was always special. It's not something you really get used to. I always felt very privileged. The same thing with Joe Strummer. To be able to spend time with him. I met a lot of people who spoke to him at a bar, had a conversation that changed their life. I had hundreds of nights in bars with him, and mornings. My wife and I, after a while, we'd have to remind each other, when we go out to dinner with Joe, we had to bring our sunglasses. Because when you walk out of a bar at 9 in the morning, you need sunglasses. And you're not really thinking about it at 7 o'clock at night, you know.
How did you meet Bill Graham?
Oh, Bill Graham? I never got close to Bill because he was scary. And also he was a promoter, and he didn't need me, I didn't need him, you know. But we saw each other enough that after a while I was like, oh, hey, you're you, you know. But I admired him a lot. And I saw him when he opened the Fillmore. Before the Fillmore, there was a place called the Anderson, and there's another place called the Village Theater, which were these big old theaters down the Lower East Side. And they were so old that when somebody played, me and my friends could go up the fire escape, shake the door, and it would just open up and you could go in. So the Fillmore opened in one of those theaters, and we figured, let's go down. The Big Brother and the Holding Company and B.B. King. And we figured we'd rattle the door and get in, and we go up to the fire escape, and there was a bank vault steel door that they had installed. The whole thing was like sealed shut, you know, and which is not very Lower East Side. It was like, who's this? You know, big time promoter. So after a while, when we knocked on the door, expect some kid inside. We're like, hippies would help each other open the door, but no, they had guards inside. So anyway, finally we left after we heard B.B. King, Albert King through the door, gave up, left, and we were walking through the alley, and we were walking past the door. They were unloading equipment, and somebody yelled at us and pushed us into the stage. And pulling equipment past us, at which point Bill Graham came by, the first time I ever, saw him in person. And he grabbed me in front of my friend and said, what are you doing backstage? Get out of here. He dragged us across the stage and threw us into the audience, not outside. Figuring maybe he thought we had snuck in from the audience. Anyway, he threw us in the audience, right in front of the stage. And then he got on stage, the Big Brother and the Holding Company, and his band comes on and starts playing wild music, and this woman was singing like nobody had ever seen before. An experience similar to Tina Turner, when you see something that is so exciting and so different from anything you've ever seen before. And I remember turning to somebody and said, who's that girl? And he said, oh, it's Janis Joplin. Because I didn't know that Big Brother had a woman in the band. I didn't know, we didn't know those things. We didn't have an internet to show us stuff. So that's when I first saw Bill Graham. Then the night Martin Luther King died, it was a tragic night, everybody feeling bad, most people not going out. Bill Graham had The Who at the Fillmore. The Who was my favorite group. I was going to see The Who. I needed some rock and roll that night. Bill took a taxi all around New York, went to every club, and told the club owners that whoever showed up or whoever trickled in, because most shows were canceled, he said, if everybody trickles in, tell them the Fillmore's open for free tonight for anybody who needs rock and roll. And who went on a little late, and they played a little late, and they came off stage around midnight, and a friend of mine had come for the 11 o'clock show, and he was pissed off because he only saw it an hour or half an hour, and he was complaining. And Bill was on stage taking what, you know, like Mayor Koch, you know, how am I doing? You know, and to take, you know, to ask a New York audience, how am I doing? They'll tell you. And it was a guy I went to high school. This guy was haranguing. I paid for my ticket and I only saw a half hour. Bill was like, you saw the only show in town tonight. And I was so embarrassed that it was a friend of mine who was, you know, because I thought that what Bill did was great. Now, on a personal level, again, I didn't really get to know him. But the first time I ever went to California, the guy I mentioned earlier, Billy Smith, who introduced me, he got me the job with Elton John. Billy also got me to Alice Cooper. But he took me on my first trip to California. I think there was a band called Black Oak Orchestra.
Black Oak Orchestra.
Orchestra. Arkansas.
Dandy.
Yeah. I think it was them recording in San Francisco, and he flew me to San Francisco to take pictures of them. And along the line, somebody in one of the record companies gave me and my wife tickets to see James Taylor in Berkeley. And so somehow we went out there in the afternoon or whatever, and we saw the show. It was a great show. I remember being a fan of James Taylor in those days. And after the show, I just assumed, you know, because hippies were nice to each other, and you could go to a parking lot, somebody's going to be going back into San Francisco. Like if I went to a show on Long Island, I would assume somebody's driving back to the city. I didn't know how different it was out there, that Berkeley's over there, like it'd be like going to Suffolk County or something, you know. So anyway, I'm in the parking lot, and car after car is leaving. I'm trying to get a ride. I keep saying to people, you know, going to San Francisco. And finally, all the cars are gone. It's just one Mercedes left near the stage door, and me and my wife are going, what the fuck now? What are we gonna do? And Bill Graham came out, and he said, what are you doing here? And I said, we're trying to get back to the city. He said, get in the back seat. And we got in the back seat. He didn't talk to us. He talked to his secretary all the way back, drove us to our hotel, and dropped us off and said, have a good time.
Wow.
That's the Bill Graham I know.
Bill Graham.
And when I went to Powder Ridge, I got there in the morning, and I'd flown, I think, to the airport to Powder Ridge, was down up in New York State there at a racetrack. And it was the first time they tried to charge for a big festival after Altamont, and they had a big fence around the place. And I remember coming backstage, I remember seeing another photographer and saying hello, and he said, yo, watch out for Bill, he's in a mood today. Which when I look over, and Bill was at the backstage door, and there was a gate about 6 feet high, and some guy had come back, and Bill has grabbed the guy and said, I told you not to come back here, and threw him over the fence. At which point I decided I wasn't going near him. My wife and I read, well, she reads to me when I'm driving upstate. Every week or every other week or so we get to get away. And she'll read to me for 2 hours in the car. And one of the best books we read was the biography of Bill Graham.
I have that.
That's a great book. We were so sad when it ended because his life was so exciting, and the book is so well written. He was quite a guy. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, great question. One more question
This
over
might be
here.
a silly question, but and somebody might have asked this, but do you have a favorite photograph?
A favorite photo? People have asked that question, not here, but I do get asked a lot. That's like saying which is your favorite kid. Fortunately, I only have two, so I know much better than the other ones. So. But I mean, there's several favorites.
I'm sure.
You know, certainly there's the Statue of Liberty with John Lennon, because for me, rock and roll is all about freedom. It's about the freedom to express your feelings very loudly in public. And that picture is all about freedom. It's about personal freedom. And I think people relate because John Lennon, to many people, is a symbol of personal freedom, similar to the Statue of Liberty. I like this picture because so many people like it. There's a picture on the cover of my book of The Clash that I think is the most powerful rock and roll picture. But I have a lot of pictures I like. I'm lucky that way.
I want
What was
to.
Nadia's question?
Oh, you want to know Nadia's question? So Nadia's my mother. Okay, she made me write this down. This is so wide open. You're gonna have to narrow it down. It's getting late.
Okay.
She wants to know what the most impactful experience of your career has been.
Impactful.
The one penultimate impactful
Well,
experience.
meeting her was a big night.
Yeah.
Yeah, meeting her, seeing.
She said life. She didn't say career. I said career in hopes to try and narrow it down. But she said
So
what's the
life
most
was
important?
her.
Yeah.
That changed everything. Made you.
Yeah.
And that was her idea. I mean, you asked the question earlier about our relationship, and I was not thinking that I would be able to have a parent kind of relationship because I already knew I wanted to travel. I was involved with so many things. I was getting high. I was drinking a lot. I didn't think I could be a parent like that. And she was determined. And when you were born, it changed my life entirely. And when you see your own child come out of your wife, you understand the meaning of life, because that's it. That's right there in front of you is life. And it became the most important thing in my life, and something to live for, and the main reason not to die. Like that was one thing, I couldn't go too far with the drugs or commit suicide because I couldn't do that to him. I could do it to me, but I couldn't do that to him. And I didn't even take into consideration my friends in that reaction, but I just could not do that to you.
I relate to that as a father.
Yeah.
That there's just some things.
No
you
matter
feel
how bad you
self-care.
feel and you want to give up or anything, you're taking care of them. You're there for them. You can't give up. You can't set that example.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a.
I do have morals. Surprise.
Yeah.
I'm in rock and roll and I have morals.
Yeah, I love it.
And most of my friends in rock and roll too. That's why they're my friends.
That's a great. I think that's a great place to end it. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dad. This has been. And thanks to Gary and Melissa so much.